The prison walls were tall, the guards were vigilant, but for Jake Fingers Malone, desperation fueled his escape. Years he had spent, plotting and planning. Tonight, under the pale moonlight, he would taste freedom. The cold air stung his lungs as he cleared the final fence. He didn't dare look back, his heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat urging him forward. Freedom was close, but he needed a new life, a new face. Legends whispered through the cell blocks, tales of a mythical place, a fountain of youth, foolish ramblings of desperate men, most would say, but for Fingers it was a beacon of hope, a chance to rewrite his destiny. He pushed through the dense undergrowth, guided only by instinct and the faintest glimmer of hope. He had to find the fountain. It was his only chance. Days bled into nights. Fingers, haggard and weary, stumbled through the wilderness. The legend of the fountain, once a distant hope, now consumed his every thought. It had to be real. The forest grew denser, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Strange symbols etched into the ancient trees marked his path. He didn't understand their meaning, but they felt important, like whispers in the wind guiding him toward his destiny. His hand brushed against something cool and smooth. Stone. He looked up. Towering before him was an archway, ancient and imposing. Vines, thick as his arm, snaked around its weathered surface. Carved into the archway, barely visible beneath the moss and lichen, were the same symbols he'd seen on the trees. This was the entrance. He could feel it in his bones. The fountain awaited. He stepped through the archway, anticipation and trepidation warring within him. The air grew heavy, laden with moisture and the scent of wildflowers. Before him, bathed in an ethereal glow, lay a sight that defied belief. A pool of water, crystal clear and shimmering, rested in the heart of a hidden glade. Sunlight streamed through the canopy above, painting dancing patterns of light on its surface. This was no ordinary water, this was the fountain of youth. Fingers approached cautiously, his gaze transfixed by the gently swirling water. A chance to cheat time itself. He knelt at the edge, his reflection staring back, weathered and etched with the hardships of his life. He dipped his hand into the cool water. A jolt like a spark of electricity shot up his arm. He withdrew his hand, his heart pounding. The legends were true. He could feel it in every fiber of his being. This was his chance for a new beginning. A low chanting, melodic and ancient, broke the silence. Fingers spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the shiv hidden beneath his ragged clothes. He was not alone. Figures emerged from the shadows of the trees, their movements fluid and silent. They were tall and cloaked in furs, their faces painted with intricate designs. Their eyes, dark and intense, held an ancient wisdom, a deep connection to this place. Fingers just knew on some level. These were the guardians of the fountain, protectors of its power. They had watched over this sacred ground for generations, ensuring the balance of life and time remained undisturbed. Their ancestors had made a pact, a sacred duty to safeguard the fountain from those who would exploit its power. They spoke in hushed tones, their language a melody of animal-like noises and guttural sounds. Fingers couldn't understand their words, but their meaning was clear. He was an intruder, and his presence was not welcome. Fingers, fueled by desperation and a lifetime of looking out for himself, ignored their warnings. He lunged toward the nearest wild man. He would not be denied. The Guardians moved with a speed that belied their age. They intercepted him, their movements swift and precise. He fought back, but his struggle was in vain. They were too strong, their reflexes almost supernatural. They pinned him down, their eyes burning into him with an ancient fury. He had broken a sacred pact, violated the sanctity of this place. They would not harm him, not physically, but the consequences of his actions would be far more profound. They chanted in unison, their voices echoing through the glade. They carried back toward the water. Fingers struggled against their grip, fear finally seeping into his heart. What were they doing to him? Fingers realized they were forcing his legs into the water. Fingers felt a tingling sensation spread through his body, starting in his legs and spreading like wildfire. He looked down in horror as his hands, rough and calloused, began to smooth his fingers, growing shorter, plumper. He was getting younger. Panic surged through him. He thrashed against the Guardian's grip, but their hold remained firm. They watched him, their expressions solemn, as his body continued to change, the years peeling away with terrifying speed. His hair darkened from grey to its youthful brown, the lines on his face fading, leaving behind smooth, unblemished skin. His clothes, once tight on his lean frame, hung loose on his shrinking form. His voice, rough and gravelly, rose in a panicked squeak. He was trapped, his body reverting to a younger version of himself, the years unwinding at an alarming pace. The Guardians continued their chant, their voices a hypnotic drone that filled his head, blocking out all other thoughts. He was helpless, a puppet in their ancient ritual, his fate entirely out of his control. Fingers, now a gangly teenager, watched in terror as his reflection in the shimmering water of the fountain grew younger with each passing second. His features, once hardened by a life of crime and desperation, now held the innocence of youth. He remembered his childhood, a time before the streets had claimed him, before he became Fingers Malone, a time of laughter and games, of scraped knees and bedtime stories, a time when the world seemed full of promise, before greed and desperation had poisoned his soul. He was paying the price for his greed, for daring to try and cheat time, for violating the sanctity of this sacred place. The Fountain of Youth, once a beacon of hope, was now his prison, a cruel reminder of the life he'd wasted, the choices he'd made. The Guardians continued their relentless chant. The fountain, once a source of life and renewal, now felt cold and unforgiving, a symbol of his folly, a mirror reflecting the consequences of his actions. Fingers, now a small, naked child, his mind a jumble of confusion and fear, stumbled back from the edge of the fountain. His cries for mercy were the whimpers of a frightened boy, his tough exterior stripped away, leaving only vulnerability. The Guardians stopped chanting. The air grew still. They looked down at him, their expressions unreadable. He was no longer a threat, just a frightened child, innocent and lost. Their duty was done. One of them gently lifted him in his arms. He didn't struggle. He couldn't. He was too weak, too disoriented. He looked up at his captor, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. What were they going to do with him? His memories were hazy, and none of them were his adult ones. The Guardian carried him away from the fountain, back through the archway, into the familiar embrace of the forest. A group of women waited, some of them holding small children who were very quiet. He caught one last glimpse of the shimmering water, of the sunlight dancing on its surface, before it disappeared from view. Fingers, his memory a hazy blur of his former life, a dream soon to be forgotten. He was a child again, innocent and unaware of the world's harsh realities, the slate wiped clean. He had been given a second chance, a chance to start over, to choose a different path. The Guardians watched from the shadows as he was carried off, his small figure disappearing into the waiting women of the tribe. Their duty was done, and now the tribe gained a new member. The fountain was safe, its power protected. The cycle of life and time would continue undisturbed. They had seen it all before. The lure of the fountain, the desperation of those seeking to escape their past. But time, like the river, flowed ever onward. It could not be dammed nor diverted. It could only be respected. They melted back into the swamp, their presence fading into the whispers of the wind, guardians of time, protectors of the delicate balance of life. The Fountain of Youth would remain, waiting for the next soul seeking its secrets, for good or for ill.